Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Denise. I'm one of the resource specialists here at the Long Island Arbor. And today for our Tune In Tuesday, we're going to be talking about academic language and specifically vocabulary development for English language learners with our special guest, Dr. Kenji Hakuda, who is on with us today. Just a reminder, we are here for you. You can call us, you can email us, you can follow on Twitter. No, excuse me. You can also, if you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel where we have presentation recordings such as this session and including presentations conducted for parents in multiple languages. To receive up-to-date PD listings and invitations for special events, you can subscribe to our listserv by sending a blank email to subscribe-bil-esl@lists.esboces.org. And additionally, many key Office of Bilingual Education resources are available and easily accessible. I will include a link to this document, which has hyperlinks to those resources in the chat in a moment. I know you are all here this afternoon to hear from Dr. Hakuda and not me, but before I introduce Dr. Hakuda, I want to briefly describe what led us to connecting with him for this afternoon. That is the challenge that many teachers of ELS face, which is teaching academic language and vocabulary, specifically Tier 3 vocabulary for ELS. Academic language and vocabulary development is challenging for students and teachers based on the ELS stage of language acquisition and the English proficiency level, and it can become more complex based on the ELS experience with using and developing language in their native language and experience with education. So what is academic language? I like this definition here because it's quick, it's to the point, and it also comes from the California ELA and ELD framework. It states here, academic language is the language used in school to help students develop content knowledge and the language students are expected to use to convey their understanding of this knowledge. And what I have done is I have broken academic language down into an infographic, and I will include a link to this infographic in the chat in a few moments. But this can be used to help teachers to really understand what academic language is and how to teach it or use it for instruction with instruction for ELS. So you have three main components. You have the language functions. So that there is, when you think about the purpose for using language, is it to compare and contrast? Is it to describe something or sequence an event? Predicting, expressing an opinion, or asking a question. Language functions are generic and use Tier 1 and Tier 2 vocabulary to meet a purpose. And the example that I have there is if the purpose of writing or speaking is to persuade, you might use the language function, in my opinion. Okay, and you could give that sentence frame to a student as a scaffold. The next component is grammatical structures. And so an example there would be nouns, past tense verbs, adjectives, adverbs of time, and idiomatic expressions that tie sentences together. Students learn grammatical structures through experience playing with the language, so listening, speaking, and writing, and therefore learning the flexibility, the syntax, and through practical use in authentic contexts. So there I have some examples to kind of give teachers who might be using this infographic as a tool to think about grammatical structures. The final component is vocabulary. So you have Tier 1, which is the basic everyday words used in writing and speaking. So some examples there are the terms window, see, book, run. You also have Tier 2 words. So those are general academic vocabulary used across content areas. So analyze, interpret, and summarize. They wouldn't be specific to one content area or domain. And then you have the Tier 3, the more challenging vocabulary, which can sometimes also become very abstract and hard to teach our students. So those are the content or domain specific terms. And the two examples I gave you are from science, temperature, and reaction. On the bottom of this infographic, I have some steps that teachers can use or follow when they are teaching academic language with their ELS or for their ELS. So the first step would be to identify the task and to take a look at the standard that you might be addressing. The second step is to identify an exemplary or novice response. The third step is to think about what is the function of language, and you can use this infographic to kind of go back to think about the purpose of writing or speaking. What grammar then and vocabulary does a student need to know to generate a response? And this would also derive a language objective, which can be posted along with your lesson or instructional objective for students to kind of see the tie and see the progression. And the fifth step would be to provide sentence stems, word banks, images, videos. All of this would be used to activate prior knowledge and to make connections between the L1, so the student's native language, and English. Additionally, that also those become your scaffolds for your students. Teachers can also use a template such as this framework when planning instruction. Which helps teachers to identify the 3 components of academic language related to the task, which is then used to create a language objective and to plan the scaffolds for Ls. This particular example comes from a text written by, I believe it was Hill and Miller, and a blank version is available in their textbook. And if you are looking at this framework right now, you might notice that it looks very similar to our BCCI Academic Language and Linguistics Demand Guide, which has been revised and aligned to the Next Generation Learning Standards and is currently being finalized for distribution. Additionally, teachers can use a matrix such as this thinking language matrix example, which is also aligned with Bloom's taxonomy, to plan for different proficiency levels of English language learners after the academic language has been identified. But sometimes, but teachers sometimes get stuck or overwhelmed with vocabulary. So how do you know which tier 3 vocabulary terms to choose? Luckily, there are web-based tools that can make selecting vocabulary from a text easier. And one tool is a tool that Dr. Hakuda has created, which is wordsift.org, which is free. It's a free resource that you can use. And here to talk about it today is Dr. Kenji Hakuda, and I thought that he could do that better than I could, just bringing you through using the tool. So Dr. Hakuda, do you want to take a moment to, most of our participants are very well aware of your accomplishments, but do you want to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm a retired guy.
Congratulations.
In tier 2 for COVID vaccination. So I'm sort of in the 65 plus category, waiting for my vaccine on Thursday. So that's good news. I retired about 3 years ago from active teaching at Stanford. And since then, I've been mostly working with state English learner directors through the Council of Chief State School Officers, supporting their work at the state level. My connection to New York, I was a neighbor of yours up in New Haven, Connecticut for quite a few years in the 80s and early 90s. And then moved out to California, but I've stayed in touch with with things happening on the East Coast, and for several years. And I think some of you are from Islip, and Islip and several other districts. I did some leadership development work for school districts in New York State a few years ago with my good friend and colleague Maria Santos. So anyway, that's my background, and this is talking about WordSift is a bit of a throwback for me. I'm having to dust off some cobwebs and get back to this tool, but it's something that I'm very proud of having developed a number of years ago, and I'm pleased to share that with you today.
Thank you. Do you want me to stop sharing my screen, and would you like to bring us through WordSift?
Sure, yeah. Am I able to share my screen?
If you are not at the moment, I will make sure you are.
Okay, it's disabled now. You'll just have to make a host or whatever.
Okay, can you do it now?
I believe this is working. Let me just get to. Are you able to see that?
We don't see a screen yet.
Okay.
Okay, let me make you
Let me-
co-host.
How about that?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Okay, great. You could probably see my desktop too. Can you see my desktop?
No, we only see your browser, so we see WordSift.
Oh, okay, great. All right. Not that I have anything. I just have pictures of my grandkid on there. So anyway, WordSift is something that I developed about 10 years ago. And this is somewhat early days of Silicon Valley, I think, and tech. And I had a grant from the Council of Great City Schools to spend a year just doing things, and I chose to work with teachers in San Francisco Unified to address some of their needs around academic language. And one of the topics that came up was vocabulary development. I had a couple of graduate students, Diego Roman, who's now at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Karen Thompson, who's a professor at Oregon State University, and a graduate student, Greg Wenches, who went into industry. And he's kind of a computer programmer. And we kind of said, well, there must be things out there that can really help with developing academic language and academic vocabulary that we could kind of organize into a tech tool. And this tool, you'll see, kind of reflects technology of the sometime in the early part of this century, yes, I guess I would say. But just to kind of give a little bit of a theoretical background, one of the things that we struggled with, and Denise, you did a great overview of different ways of thinking about language as vocabulary and as sentence structures and as discourse and action and so forth. And so that's kind of one way of, and an important way of parsing language, to say, well, you know, there are different avenues to this. There are different ways we might assess them, and most language proficiency assessment, like what New York State uses to assess English language proficiency of English learners, address different components of language, and the reality of this, though, is that language, while we can sit back and analytically break them into components, in terms of the learner's experience, language is this integrated whole thing. It's not like you know, I'm going to do vocabulary now and then I'm going to do sentences later and so forth. It's really an integrated experience. And we were talking about that with teachers and saying, well, let's you know, think about having a tool that helps engage students with text, and encourages language activities that could could be built around how they sort of engage with text. And you know, one of the great things about vocabulary is that it is the most, in a sense, concrete aspect of language. You know, when you're talking about subject verb number agreement, that's a pretty abstract concept, whereas words are really sort of these concrete things, and they can be counted. And when you know, kind of look back at the history of you know, how psychologists and educators have tried to study children's language going back to the early 1900s, one of the first tests that were developed and one of the first research questions that was asked was around vocabulary. You know, how many words can we expect children to know at different different developmental milestones? And so, you know, pediatricians would work with with tools, little kits to assess language development, and most of that had to do with kind of tables that sort of said, do the kids know these words, right? And do a checklist and see if, and then there's like most developmental things, there's sort of a norm, and there's a variation around the norm and so forth. And so a lot of early statistical work around language development was done around developing these vocabulary measures of vocabulary that became the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test, which many of you have probably seen. And if you're kind of work with speech pathologists and so forth, that's one of the measures that's still in use, the current version. But a lot of that was really based on the early research of the 1920s and 1930s. But one of the things about vocabulary is that you could think about vocabulary in terms of the definition of words, but you can also think about vocabulary in terms of how a thesaurus expresses it. So what is what are words similar to to this word? So if it's if the word is entity, entity could also mean thing, right? The thing would be a sort of a more general synonym to entity, and so there's kind of so a word is not just sort of the definition of it, but also its connection to other words. So we started, we were quite intrigued, for example, by the work that a group of psychologists at Princeton University, George Miller and his colleagues, had done in what they called WordNet. And WordNet is a database of language, of vocabulary words, in terms of their relationships in usage and in terms of their thesaurus relationships and so forth. So it's very much like, there's kind of a parallel between how we think about people and how we think about words. So you can think about people in the way that, let's say, the Census Bureau thinks about people. You enumerate the number of people who live in a particular community. You might sort of categorize them and count the number of people within certain subgroups of that community. So how many men, how many women, how many blacks, how many whites, and so forth. And so that's one way you can think about people. But you can also think about people in terms of their relationships to each other. So, you have sibling relationships, you have friendships, you have communities, you have classrooms of students and so forth. And so you can think about, and that's what this whole social network thing now is about, right? Is that it's not just the individuals who are part of that community, but what their connection is and how they do that. And we know from Facebook and others that has tremendous value. It has great commercial value because it tells you about how to market products and so forth. So the connection between people is really a lot of where kind of communities and social organization can be looked at. And words are in that way that's similar. That is, you can think about language and vocabulary not just as individual words, but connections between words. And so this database called WordNet is freely and publicly accessible. And then there are organizations and companies that have taken that, and the Visual Thesaurus is one of them. And we we learned from the visual thesaurus, even though we don't actually use it in this particular program. We do something similar to it. And it gives you a visual picture of the relationship between words. So we incorporated that into WordSift and said, well, let's think of a tool in which you could enter text, and that will show you the relationships between words in addition to just telling you what are some of the characteristics of the words in the text. So so that's basically the simple idea. And if you go to wordsift.org, you'll come to this landing page. And you could, in this box, enter any text that you want. So there are a couple of examples that you could throw in here. Down here, there's a connection to a Wikipedia entry on Darwin and evolution, which is one of my favorite topics. And so that entered, but just by clicking that, you could, it enters a text. You could enter any text. So you could go to Wikipedia and take their current entry and, you know, kind of copy and paste it into this box. And then you click this button, Sift, and it'll give you basically a word cloud. So this is similar to Wordle, right? Same idea. It expresses the 50 most frequent words in this case, and you can change it in this you know, through these boxes here. But this gives you the 50 most common frequent words that occurred in that text. So you can see that because it was on Darwin and evolution, Darwin as a popular common name shows up as the largest text, but you can see that there's, you know, natural selection and evolution, origin, species, and so forth. So that's one way to express it, is just in terms of what are the most frequent words in this text. And that itself could generate a kind of a discussion among students about what, you know, what they might expect to find when they read that text. But I talked about the relationships between words, and the visual thesaurus, if you scroll down, and this version doesn't work that well on an iPhone just because it's so small. I mean, there's a lot of information crammed into this, but it'll work with a large iPad or, you know, obviously with a computer screen. So this gives you the relationship between the word, in this case, it's Darwin, but let's just take something like species. And if you go to the word species and I just click that, it gives you the thesaurus relationship of, you probably can't read this if you're, so I encourage you later, just trust me for now. But it gives you sort of the word species, and then its connection to words like strain, breed, stock, or variation, form, genus, or kind, form, sort, variety. So these are sort of thesaurus relationships. If you go to that area and scroll over the word or right click on it, it'll allow you to look up the word and that'll give you the dictionary definition. But this is just a way of appreciating that the word exists in a context of relationships with other words, right? And could generate some interesting discussion among students. So you could just kind of use this to, here's a word theory, and that'll show you now the relationship of the word theory to laws and laws of nature, beliefs, and so forth. Now, of course, depending on the level of your student, you know, this may not be that helpful if you're at a very beginner level of English language proficiency. But you know, people have looked for high frequency words and made use of this feature. Now, one of the things you can do with this also is to mark specific types of words. And so if you go to this thing that says mark words, we talked about academic words, right? And it'll show you the academic words that are in this text. It will also show you the general service list, which is the more high frequency words. So let me just first click on the academic words. And so here you've got marked in a different color, in this case blue, the words that are on the academic word lists that are out there. So, you know, selection, evolution, theory, survive, and so forth. If you go and ask it to mark the general service lists words, it'll show you the more general words like work, change, population, common, and so forth. And so with some of your beginner students, this might be the, you know, the place to start is what are the words in this text that have the more general service words. And then if you're interested in a particular discipline, for example, science, these are text words from the science text. We drew on Marzano's work. He has a list of words that are in the language arts, science, math, and social studies. So if you want discipline-specific words, these could be some of the third tier words that appear. I don't know what math will turn up here. These are some of the words from math that turn up, but it's just an opportunity to play around with the vocabulary in a text that you're about to encounter. The other thing that we then occurred to us next was if you take a word like evolution, what would be the image of evolution? Right. And unfortunately, Google restricts us now. It used to be that Google didn't restrict the number of visual searches that you could do when you go through their search. And there's a quota of 20,000, 10,000 searches a day, which we have enough users that gets used up pretty quickly. But in this box that says Google image search quota exceeded, there is, or if you're below 10,000, if you get up early in the morning, you'll see an image pop up. You can still get to it in a separate browser. There's a little tag here that says images. And if you click on that, it'll just open up a different browser thing that will show you the image results from Google Images for evolution. So again, this is a way to quickly and easily draw up some images related to that word from Google search. You may have to be careful about some of the filters that are around, the typical warnings that you would have about putting Google searches in the hands of students. But that's just kind of the 21st century, right? So, and then some of them are unexpected. Like I had an elementary school teacher who tried babbling brook at one point, and from some text that they were using, and that turned up some mildly pornographic kinds of images. So things like that do happen. So just a slight warning. So it's a way of clicking on a word. So that was evolution. Species would turn up a different image for different species. So you can have this, encourage students to have discussion about, okay, so which of these pictures that came up might be the best representation of the word species, right? And that could generate activities. We do not prescribe any particular set of activities with this. We just encourage teachers as much as possible to use this for different activities. So teachers have used it, and we get emails from users who say, I've used it for this is kind of fun, and so forth. It's, we kind of categorize this into activities previewing text. And so some kind of group activity where you might sort of, before getting into a text, showing the word cloud and then exploring around in it. It's been used also for some kind of a formative assessment of the classroom in terms of the sort of vocabulary support that might be needed to work with the text. You could arrange this in terms of, you could sort the words from the most common to the most rare, or the most rare to the most common. Let's do rare to common. And so now I've got them ordered from the rarest words, that is rarest as appearing in the sort of printed English list. So you'll see that the most frequent is the word new, which in this particular database showed up 33,000 times. Here's the word time, May 1st, and so forth. And here are the more difficult words. So you could sort of use this to assess for kids. Typically, there's a pretty high correlation between word frequency and familiarity with the word. So they'll be able to kind of draw a line to say, well, somewhere around genetic and selection is where I sort of run out of knowledge. So all of those words look kind of unfamiliar. The ones down here, I feel like I know, and so forth. And so it's a way of doing it in the kind of a formative assessment around vocabulary. Finally, the last feature I'd like to point out is you could use it. I'll do population here. If you go down to the bottom, you'll see the particular text, and it marks where that word appeared in the text. So you can actually go to the text itself, and here's that on the right is the full text of what I just entered from Wikipedia, right? And then it marks where the word population showed up, and then these are specific sentences in that particular order in which they appeared, and then it'll show you where in the passage that word appeared. So it's just a way of connecting the particular words to the segment of the text. You can go back and say, okay, where did let's see. There are some words that are more interesting or helpful than others. A mechanism. If you say, what's a mechanism? Why would they want to say this? And you could look at the meaning using this panel here. You can say, well, let's see how the word mechanism is used in this text. And here they're talking about sort of mechanisms of evolution, right? So here the first sentence is, two major mechanisms determine if variants will become more common or rare in a population. Okay, so then that means that the text is going to refer to mechanisms, right? And then sure enough, you go look further down. Here's two major mechanisms, and it talks about the first one, and then the other major mechanism driving evolution is genetic drift, and so forth. So it's just a way of starting to connect specific words to how they determine the structure of a text. So, I mean, there are different ways of metaphors that people have used, and some people said, well, it's kind of like when you're trying to adjust a microscope in terms of the focus, it'll sometimes sort of get it, focus on the smaller stuff. You can zoom out to the getting a bigger picture. You can zoom in and out. So this is kind of a way of zooming in and out of text. It's just a tool to enable that. Another interesting use of this is evaluating your own writing. I use this actually when I write letters of recommendation, for example. And after I write a letter of recommendation, I'll take the text and dump it into WordSift. And sometimes I'll find that I've overused some words. And that's a helpful way of detecting that. And I'll look for synonyms and so forth. But it's just a way of exploring writing as well. So those are kind of the if I were developing this today further, I would probably get more into voice recognition and more audio stuff. I'd try to probably relate it to other databases that are out there that might be more interesting. Like there's, you know, kind of databases of songs and lyrics and so forth that might engage kids at different ages. You know, rap and so forth. And so they're just different ways you can do this. But so this is, you know, again, it was developed about 10 years ago. We refreshed it. I don't know if Simon Wiles joined, but Simon is joined our group, and I don't think he is. But I'm going to stop. Actually, I'll just keep the screen up here, I think, and see if. But Simon, if you're around, could you just speak up? I sent the invitation, but he wasn't sure whether you could join or not. No, okay. Anyway, so 2 or 3 years ago, Simon, who's a really good natural language kind of processing programmer, reprogrammed WordSift to be faster, and we, you know, kind of redid the the interface a little bit based on user feedback. But we're not currently, it's sort of inactive in terms of revision, but we're always open to suggestions and usage and so forth. So with that caveat, it's, you know, the price is right, it's free, and quite a few teachers find it useful. I don't have a good estimate of the number of teachers who use it, but, you know, we exhaust our 10,000 search limit quite early in the day, so we know that's one indicator of usage. Another thing I would just say that would be really helpful would be, there are Spanish and other language versions of WordNet that's available, so it's not just available in English. So I think, you know, in the future, as people start connecting databases, you know, translation technology is getting much better. And so we can start thinking about interfacing across languages, but that's not here, and that's for somebody in the future to do. But I think there's a lot of potential here around this general area of natural language processing, and then being able to you know, so we've taken the area of vocabulary and said, oh, this is really kind of much more complex than just a list of vocabulary words. So teaching it really should be, you know, kind of consistent with this idea of we're not just trying to fill marbles in a bucket with vocabulary. We're really trying to help students appreciate the connection, the interconnection between words, and the same could be really said for other levels of language as well. You know, so you know, even you know, large texts like books, you know, we ought to think not just in terms of what that, you know, what a novel is, but what the relationship is between this novel and that novel, right? Those are the more sophisticated, higher order thinking that happens. And so this is a very simple start with the most quantifiable part of language, which is vocabulary. So I'm going to stop there, and I'd love to hear questions, and then kind of set up any way that as you try this out, I really, you know, encourage you to just play around with it. You can't break it, so so please play around with it and give us any feedback and encourage others to use it.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Fukuda. And I know we don't have a number on how many teachers have used it or currently use it actively, but you have a whole lot more that are just learning about this tool today. And in the chat, we're flooded with some comments about how they're excited to get to know this fantastic tool. And thank you for sharing your the intent on creating the wordsift.org, but also your thoughts on how it can be used, because you know, it went beyond my thinking of how I can use this. Really, I was originally thinking it could use predominantly for planning for vocabulary instruction, but I love the ideas on how it can be used with monitoring as a student tool. to kind of see and make those connections between vocabulary and student choice on choosing the image that best represents or helps them best understand the vocabulary term. One of our participants also pointed out that in case others missed it, in that same box where you can open the Google image, there's also a link to videos. So you can quickly get and find videos, which of course I would kind of, depending on the topic and the term and the grade level, that would be something I would take a look at first before sharing openly with your students, like just as Dr. Hakuda is doing right now. There was one question, and from my use, I think I can answer the question, but maybe Dr. Hakuda, you want to share that article that you used was the sample on evolution from Wikipedia, but how would a teacher get their text into wordsif.org?
It's pretty much copy and paste. And so you could copy and paste whatever text you have and just do a right click and paste it in. What do I have in my keyboard right now? Oh, right. I had a copy of an article that I wrote on a very general article on bilingual education. So what's that article about?
Right.
So that'll tell you. So that's just it's a simple right click, and there is no limit. Although I've just a test that I've entered enormous texts into this, and eventually it does kind of croak on you. But for most practical purposes, there's no real size limit to what you throw in there.
Great, thank you. And I want to open this, or of course, Dr. Hakuda, if you have a recommendation as well, I want to open up to the participants because one of our participants is asking if I have a text that comes from a physical textbook, so something that's not digital, how could I get it into WordSift? So I'm certain that there is some technology that can help us with that at this point. I myself don't have a tool that I can share, but is there any participant or Dr. Hakuda, if you have come across a tool that might help get a physical text into wordsif.org, if anyone has?
For PDFs, you could just go in and do a sort of if you have the right Adobe program, get if you get into selection mode, like highlighting text and so forth, then you could just highlight all and copy and paste off of PDFs. But if it's something like a photograph or an image, you could, I think there's some programs. I know I have a Genius Scan program, I think that does that will take text, but it's not perfect. It'll depend on the quality of the photo, but it is one of those that if you had a smart a whiz programmer type of person available, you could probably the iPhone technology now, the camera resolution is good enough so that you could get to the point where you could take a photo and convert that into text. But that's beyond my ability now.
And I think maybe, let me see here. One of our participants, Deborah, had shared that Office Lens. I'm not sure if that is an app or a part of Office, but Office Lens, it says here, if you can take a photo of the text and convert them into Word. So that might be able to help you if you have that physical, something that, curriculum that is coming from a physical textbook that you don't have digital access to, you can use some technology to get that, that language into WordSift to kind of help you. So I hope that answered your questions there. I'm not sure if we have a response to this or maybe some ideas again from the participants. Can you generate cognates through this program? Or for anyone that might have some ideas on how we can do that. So if we're working to, find the cognates, maybe if you don't have, the teacher, the educator doesn't have the experience with the language, but there are cognates there. Can you generate cognates through this program? So if anyone has any ideas, or Dr. Hakuda, if that's something that you have run into before. Share.
Yeah, we talked about it, and we did a search. We looked around for useful lists. I mean, so the under the marked words, we had, um, we in doing this, we thought about cognates as something. If we had a list available, it could be done easily. That is, if we had a useful list of cognates, because that all of these lists that we have are published lists by people who've done research of texts, and Marzano around sort of textbooks in the different subject areas, the work that that some researchers had done in New Zealand on academic words and so forth. So, and there, we just didn't run across any that we felt was that helpful at that time. But we would, it's definitely doable. Others may, there may be people on this in this meeting who are aware of anything or things that they use.
Definitely. And if you are and you want to unmute and share, or you can put it in the chat. A lot of our participants are responding to one another in the chat here. Mostly comments. Like I said, we have, I think that most of the participants here today, this is a new tool for them. So they're excited. They love the word relationships. I really like that as well. Something I was thinking about when Dr. Hakuda was sharing his thought about word relationships, or even with the thesaurus, that word net, that visualization. Students may have come across this vocabulary term or the meaning of this vocabulary word in either their native language or in other studies, and they might now see that word mapped out, and so now they're activating that prior knowledge. So I think that that's not something that we might use in instruction as often, or realize the importance of it. But so thank you for bringing
Right.
that to light again for us. And even part of our educator group here today includes speech therapists, who will be integrating or plan to integrate the tool into their sessions with their students. And as Dr. Hakuda had mentioned, he would love to learn about how we are using WordSift in instruction, but also in activities with students. And so I encourage you, as you play around with this in the next few days and weeks, to reach out to me to let me know, and I'll put my email address at the end of our session, to let us know how you're using it, because Dr. Hakuda would is open to joining us again to learn about how we have been using it, and to see student samples or student work. I think that, I would love to see it, and so would our colleagues and Dr. Hakuda as well.
Yeah, Denise, if I may,
Yes.
I would love to hear sort of and learn from your experiences and hear any suggestions. And if you do, I'll make sure that Simon, my programmer friend, colleague, that he could join us, because I'm sure he'll have some ideas on how it could be operationalized on this. And we have been talking off and on about trying to do a new version. So so maybe we'll be able to incorporate some of your suggestions.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
One other comment I wanted to make, just we talked about tier 1, 2, 3 vocabulary words, but a lot of vocabulary words also, do cross over tiers, and sometimes the WordSift will help you be aware of that. I remember one art sample that we're looking at on climate change and global warming. I remember running across the word area, and the word area was used within the same text in both the sense of the area, like the region or the place, the area of the globe and so forth, where global warming was happening and so forth. But it was also used in the mathematical sense of the area, the space covered, right? So how many square miles? And so, so you've got in there already a kind of a tier 1 and a tier 3 vocabulary. right? And so it's really kind of just these little insights that even as a linguist or as a psycholinguist anyway, I think about language a lot. But that was to me an insight, thinking, oh yeah, here's kind of it's kind of interesting and almost tricky how the same word is shows up in a given text once in a very tier 3 sense and the other in a tier 1 sense.
Yeah, and we had here participant had said that they are kind of playing around with it right now as we speak, and had copy and pasted a student's piece of work into WordSift. And so I think it would also be kind of great for students to see how many tier 1, 2, and 3 words they're using, or and even to inform your instruction to say, well, this particular student at this English proficiency level or stage of language acquisition has kind of mastered the tier 1, tier 2 words, but needs a little bit more maybe explicit instruction with using those content specific vocabulary terms to kind of make their writing a little bit more, something a little bit more compelling. And I see here too, some questions we have from participants are, what grade level would you use or age level would you use WordSift for?
Right. And our original group that I worked with were science teachers in middle school in San Francisco. So that was kind of and middle school up is probably the sweetest spot, just because, there's, I think for English learners, I think this would be a great thing for so-called the long-term English learner population, especially to really help develop their kind of connection to text. And I really think about this less, not just around academic language development, but really sort of engagement with text. It's really a way to kind of think that, oh, text is not just something that's sort of printed and shows up, but something that you could really start engaging with and chopping and slicing and doing things with it. So it's really those activities with the text that's important, and I think that's one of the issues that I think long-term English learners, especially, not, I mean, for that matter, adults struggle with this too. But especially in middle school. I have less insights on uses in sort of elementary school, especially early elementary, except maybe to kind of empower them and having them with just think that there are connections, links between words and images, could be one, just the sort of the basic insights.
Yes, and we kind of, just to add on to that, in elementary, I'm thinking of my own elementary day experience of creating word walls where we can, kind of branch out and show the connections between whether it's with content or connections because of synonyms, or even to show antonyms. So the word relationships. And one of our participants had said also, that this is a wonderful extension of the text to text, text to self, text to world process, and now word to word connections. And I love the idea of thinking that, this is, more than just vocabulary terms that we have to memorize, but more playing with the vocabulary, playing with the language, and seeing how they all kind of work together and tie together to bring us greater meaning of what it is that we're either trying to say ourselves, or even read about or write about. I had one thought about how we might be able to use or integrate, that audio or that, text to voice. There's a lot of technology right now where students can record their voice and use it for self-assessment, or even using something with audio and video like Flipgrid and responding to one another. So you can use those tools, and you can take the transcript and put the transcripts into WordSift, so that students can kind of see how they are, using language, how many times they might say utterances like or other language, to help them kind of become better at speaking English. That's just one of my own ideas that kind of came while we
Mhm.
were, we were
Right.
talking.
I think that's a great idea. I do have one caveat, and one of the things that we don't have is the ability to save the work, right? So notice that this is completely like you don't set up an account or you don't have anything that we keep. Um, we don't even keep the text that people enter. It's just sort of it's just there, and we want people to use it. But unfortunately, you'd like to be able to save your work and so forth occasionally. And the only way we have to save anything is just basically a screenshot. Um, and so that's for somebody else to do. But maybe that'll be a commercial enterprise by somebody who wants to make some money on on this idea.
Yeah, and that works. I think we've all
Mhm.
become experts at screenshots.
Right.
So that can definitely work
Mhm.
for students. And I like the idea too of taking a screenshot or printing the screen of the cloud, or even the, sorting the words, whatever feature, whatever filter you may have used, and that can be printed and put into your physical classroom, or it can be added as a document in your Google Classrooms or Microsoft Teams,
Mhm.
something that students can refer to at a later date. Another participant here had said, where is it here? Oh, the cloud. An idea too is that the cloud generates, this is from Adrian, a cloud generates a word bank for students to retell or respond to its story or text. So that might be another great reason why you would want to take a screenshot, or print the screen here, print the page, so that students can kind of refer back to it. I also like too, when you mark the words or sort the words in some way, whatever makes sense for your students and for your instruction or your curriculum for that day, to kind of use those lists or those filters to determine which vocabulary terms you should be teaching at that moment. So depending on your students, depending on your instruction, sometimes it's hard when you put take a look at a text and you have nearly every word for your students could be a word that you might want to spend time on, but to kind of use WordSift to choose those words that you will work on right now for your students,
Mhm.
that could be helpful. And then I like, being able to pull the images and the visualization. Some comments here about the visualization, the WordNet, have been that it's fairly small. So I would probably recommend that once you pull it up and you expand it to a new tab or new window, I would try zooming in on your browser,
Mhm.
and that might bring you a little closer to it. So that might be helpful,
Mhm.
just playing around with it. And let's see here. Yeah, there are a lot of great ideas I see. And what I love too is that this is a
Mhm.
tool that can be used for, I think we can make it work for every grade level, including adults, which we have some participants say that they can use it with their adult learners, but also for all our subgroups of students. So I have speech therapists talking about using it with students that might have speech and language impairments, but also special education students. So it can be very useful for students who might like to use this essentially becomes something a little bit more hands-on with language. They can kind of click around and choose those, look at the web
Mhm.
and click on the words, choose those images. And then also we have here, teachers who kind of plan to use it in AP settings. So advanced classes to examine and break down historical documents.
Mhm.
So, I don't have anyone in our chat who has used it yet. But we do have teachers asking about how to use it in the AP setting, or if anyone has experience. And I would just recommend that, you try it out yourself and have students try it out. And it's quick and easy to use. And I think, most participants and teachers won't have trouble navigating. And as we had mentioned, we would love to kind of learn about how you are using it. And so if you are, keep some notes, take some screenshots, show us how you are, putting it in your Google Classroom, letting us know how your students are interacting with it. That would kind of be, really exciting. And maybe we can even share this with Dr. Hakuda and also Simon, if he's able to attend, to, maybe get some more
Great.
feedback. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And finally, if you become quite nerdy about this, I would encourage you to play around with some of the tabs up here. There's different cloud styles that you can select from, and I'd love to hear feedback from you on that. There's also on this little gear tab. If you go there, you could make adjustments on the display, including the maximum number of words that you choose. So this is set at 50 as a default, but you could go up and down on that, depending on the size, the length of the text and so forth. So you can play around with different things. There's other sort of visual kind of angle stuff, which I don't myself understand, but you could geek out on that if that's what you're into. But I encourage you to play around with that.
Thank you. And as I mentioned, today was a snow day or a second snow day for most of us here on Long Island. And so I want to thank all of our participants for joining us, even though most of you are, in between shoveling sessions. And of course, I want to thank Dr. Hakuda. We are beyond thankful and excited to have this opportunity to speak with you and to learn about WordSift, something that you put a lot of thought and energy into. And many of us will be trying it out. In the chat, I am going to put a link to an evaluation form because we love to bring resources that are made for our participants. So please make sure to complete the evaluation form. Actually, I think it just went to a private chat. Okay, there we go. So please complete that form for us and reach out to me. Here's my email address. I'm Denise at the Long Island Arborn. If you do get a chance to try out WordSift, we want to hear about it, and maybe you'll even be able to present it and show your work to Dr. Hakuda. I think we had plans for the last, let me pull up the date. It was in February, right? Sorry, let's see here. All right, I have to pull up the date.
26th, February 26th.
That we got, yes, the last Friday. It's on the tip of my tongue. Thank you. The last Friday in February. So try to reach out to me before that if you have some examples to share. And if that's all, if we don't have any other questions, we will let Dr. Hakuda get back to retired life.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Well, please share my email too. It's
I will.
simple. Yes. It's hakuta@stanford.edu. It's also somewhere on this website as well for feedback. Simon's address is on there as well. And if you wanted to send any thoughts or feedback even before the 26th or whenever that was, I'd be happy to do that. And I did want to end by just thanking you all for doing the great work that you're doing. Being a retired person, I kind of sit and feel sort of a little guilty that all my colleagues are out there still teaching and struggling with all these online and hybrid teaching environments or whatever situation people are in. I hear from all the state administrators that work with the districts and on how much of a struggle it is, and yet how dedicated and amazing educators have been. So I wanted to kind of thank you, and sorry that I'm not as much part of the action as I could be, but it's not without a great sense of appreciation for all that you're doing.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Hakuda. And we look forward to sharing, continuing to share our work with you. And we thank you for being with us today. And So with that, we will be in contact, and I encourage you to reach out to myself and also Dr. Hakuda to share your work. And I thank you all again. I echo what Dr. Hakuda is saying, the amazing job that we are all doing, and especially being here today on a snow day for most of you, or in between sessions, because I know now many of you have a hybrid day or remote day, excuse me. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your
Okay,
day.
thank
And we'll
you.
see you soon. Bye, Dr. Hakuda. Thank
Bye.
you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.